So, this week in the Sacred Gathering, we're going to be looking at a passage that I think is familiar, but maybe because of that, it's one we need to take a little closer look at. So, we are looking at Romans chapter 12, the first handful of verses, both looking at how we're supposed to live our lives, as well as what it might mean for kind of the church and some unity about that. The verses start with kind of one of these classic Paul's therefore, and you're like, therefore what? What are we talking about? So normally we have to like dig into a lot of context when grabbing a heavy section out of Paul. But lucky for us, in a lot of ways, these first two verses that we're going to spend most of our time with this week is a summation of, I would say, the first 11 chapters of Romans. He talks about a lot of things, but this is kind of the big punchline. This is the big, therefore, we should be doing these things. So just by jumping in, we can kind of figure out what it is he's wanting to talk about. So let me start by reading just these couple of verses in Romans chapter 12. So, brothers and sisters, because of God's mercy, I encourage you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice that is holy and pleasing to God. This is your appropriate priestly service. Don't be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds so that you can figure out what God's will is, what is good and pleasing and mature. So I think the first thing I wanted to spend a little time with was just recognizing that we're familiar with this language, right, of the living sacrifice. There's even a good metal band with that name. But sacrifice is actually language I would say we're very unfamiliar with in the modern world, right? I mean, the most common thing I can think of sacrifice is when the Olympics are on, right? Everyone talks about the great sacrifices parents often have to make to their schedule and to kind of their normal routines in life to give this athlete a chance to, compete at that high of a level. Now, I'm not saying we want to make light of that. There is a sacrifice there involved, but when Paul is using that language, he is living in a part of the world where people feel so desperately out of control about the world around them that there are people who are literally sacrificing their own children for the sake of trying to control the weather, of trying to have some bit of prediction or some stability from weather and making sure that they will have enough food to eat, right? The kind of religious assumption at the time, and one that I would argue still kind of haunts us in some ways, is if I can do a big enough sacrifice, if I can give up that which is most valuable to me, if I can bleed enough, whether it's through the lives of animals or my children or me proving myself to the gods, then maybe I'll have enough to scrape by, right? The just desperation that would drive someone to this kind of view of the divine, I think is often lacking, and Paul is assuming it in some ways, right? I think the negative side of that is, of course, this means we have a very distinct kind of bracketing for what is religious and what religious life requires. And our assumption is generally it requires a lot of pain, a lot of great sacrifice, but then we can have the rest of our lives. We can have prosperity. We can have kind of goodness in other parts of our lives because we've done our part. We've done the hard thing. We've bled. We've gone through the ritual, etc. And I actually think this is one of the mentalities that even the Old Testament is desperately God trying to wrestle this kind of bargaining, this kind of this kind of buyer-seller routine. Like if you do this, even if it's really hard, then God will do this for you. Get what you want out of it. You get to have your normal life, right? If we look at the Old Testament Torah, the Old Covenant, yes, one way of doing it would be like, this is sacrifice here. God wants us to do lots and lots of things. But I think another way of looking at that is God is setting up a sacrificial system, recognizing the people do need that to not overvalue things, but it also has an amazing attention to the everyday, right? The types of clothes they're wearing, the way they spend their money, the people they're associating with, the ways in which they take care of people. And throughout the Old Testament, God is often deeply angry that people will go through the motions, but their hearts are simply not in it, right? They continue to see their kind of poorer or more at-risk brothers and sisters as resources, as things that they can use. They're not doing justice They're just going through the religious motions. Isaiah's got this great passage where God spits out, right? He rejects their sacrifices because their hearts aren't in it. They're more interested in just going through the motions, getting what they can from God, and then not letting this affect their kind of inner hearts, their way of dealing with people. And so I think we see this again with Christ as well, right? Christ spends a ton of time talking about God's heart and who he is and his own relationship with the Father, which continues to offend people. He says, no, we have a very strict religious system of things. We say who's in, we say who's out, we say what you're supposed to do. Again, in that day, they were taking it very, very seriously because they wanted something from God. They wanted to get rid of these hated Romans, right? They wanted something big from God. Well, fine, we're going to be really, really sacrificial. We're really going to do a lot of hard things to get God's attention, to earn the ability to kick out the Romans, to get what we want, our own kingdom and all that stuff back. And so if that's the context, that's the assumption people have of what sacrifice is, I think we have a little bit better idea of how radical Paul's invitation here is when he says, brothers and sisters, because of God's mercy, because of the good things God has given us before we made the sacrifice, I encourage you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, right? Nothing dies, nothing is destroyed, but at the same time, we have an ongoing obligation not to sacrifice again and again and again, but to make the whole thing God's. That this life is no longer about me and my wants. I jump through the hoop to get God off my back, and then I get what I want out of it, whether it's prosperity or safety, etc., right? And again, I bring this up because I think this mentality still haunts a lot of the way we are going to approach God if we're not careful. God is interested in kind of our heart and who we are, in living out following him well, being a living sacrifice, rather than showing great effort, showing this great willingness to deny ourselves, to break things, whatever it is, for the sake of him. We're not impressing God, right? It says, because of the grace God has given me, because of the mercy. We're going to hear that all through those. Not more effort, but this is a response to those good things that God is going to give us. And so that attitude of what it actually means to have a life that is a living sacrifice, an ongoing giving up of what we desire and want for God, is expressed really well and importantly in these next verses, right? Don't be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds so you can figure out what God's will is, what is good and pleasing and mature. And I think that the one of the important things about this is this contrast that he's doing. Again, why is it we would desire conformity in the first place, right? Well, the idea is you know what to expect. Conformity, I'm thinking like, when we go to a training or something like that, we know we go to a training for work, we're coming out at the end of this thing with a better understanding of something very specific, right? That's what a lot of the kind of religious work in Jesus' day was trying to do as well, right? Like if you go through the motions, if you learn these things, if you do jump through these hoops, do these right things, you will be formed into this kind of a person. The problem with that, again, is I don't think God is ultimately trying to train slaves or even obedient ones. The metaphor that Jesus is almost constantly using is children. Children are meant to be growing up to assume the responsibilities, to become like their parents in that culture, right? To carry on the family name, etc. And so when Jesus, and then Paul's going to later do this as well, when the goal, by the help of God, is to grow into a kind of maturity, to grow into kind of a likeness of who we come from, simple conformity, simply becoming the thing that was predicted, actually is not God's goal here. And I think that's the difficulty, is we want to know what to expect. We want to know how these things are going to affect us. We want to know what it is God is doing in our lives, whereas transformation requires trust. It requires grace. It requires God doing work within us that maybe we don't want done. It requires God um, making us into something that we maybe did not think we were capable of becoming. Transforming is language that looks a lot more like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly than it does a tradesman's language, although Jesus and Paul will both use that language as well. And so I think the renewal of our minds, the dependence on God's work and God's Spirit is something that can be both very freeing but also very scary because we do not know what it is God is up to in the imagination there. And so this invitation to live this life of sacrifice, to not think in the way the world does, but to allow God to transform us is a beautiful invitation, but one that can also be a little bit scary. And so as we're thinking about this, the fact that living sacrifice and kind of nonconformity is a major element of what it looks like to follow Jesus well, to be transformed by him, I just want us to ask ourselves this question, like, okay, if that is our assumption, that we don't get to be like everyone else around us, right? Like, honestly, what does that actually look like for you? What does that look like for me? Whose approval, what type of person do we most want the approval of? Is it a type of person that we wish we could be more like? Is it, our family? What is our value there? Is it our bosses at work? What do we wish we were more like? Who are the people whose approval we're most likely to seek out? Is it God's or is it something else? Who do we most fear disappointing if we don't become what they want, right? Do we fear the people around us disapproving of us because our values are simply not the same, because we simply cannot embrace the things that are embraced in the culture around us, right? And if we're not willing to embrace some of those things, does that imply a kind of critique? That's not real in right now, right? People don't want to say that or hear that. And so I think for us personally, we have to just recognize, yes, nonconformity is not an abstract principle. It is an important part of following Christ well and recognizing that his approval, his transformation of our lives is always going to be challenged, and I think within our own hearts, by the type of people we value, the type of person we want to be, the people who we fear to disappoint. So what does it look like for us to admit that, to know that, to maybe confess that, and recognize that at times we want that. We want to fit in. We want to think like they think or be like them in a way that's just simply not compatible with what Paul is actually inviting us into and talking about here. And so with that kind of assumption, let me read briefly the next section, because he's going to spend a lot of time going through in the rest of this passage or the rest of the book of Romans, what are some different ways we can show our lives as living sacrifices, being formed into the mind of Christ, being shown to not conform to the world around us, right? And a huge one of those is how the church will approach unity versus how we tend to approach unity. So this next section sounds like this. Because of the grace that God has given me, I can say to each one of you, don't think of yourselves more highly than you ought to think. Instead, be reasonable, since God has measured out a portion of faith to each of you. We have many parts in one body, but the parts don't all have the same function. In the same way, though there are many of us, we are one body in Christ, and individually we belong to each other. We have different gifts that are consistent with God's grace that has been given to us. If your gift is prophecy, you should prophesy in proportion to your faith. If your gift is service, devote yourself to serving. If your gift is teaching, devote yourself to teaching. If your gift is encouragement, devote yourself to encouraging. The one giving should do it with no strings attached. The leader should lead with passion. The one showing mercy should be cheerful. So I think one of the main things that Paul is doing here is, okay, if your life is supposed to be a living sacrifice, if your worldview and way of being is different than that about the world around you, one of the major ways you're going to show this is just humility, of realistically not, engaging with the kind of competition that was true back in Paul's day. It's true in our day now, where a lot of our value comes from who are we better than? Who are we smarter than? Who are we richer than, etc., right? This comparative game of value in which we always have to find those that are lower than us or not as cool as us or not as smart as us, etc., right? Humility simply says the good things about me, and it says it right there, because of the grace God gave us, because we have received mercy, right? Kids don't get to be all high and mighty about their toys often because the toys are given to them by someone else, right? And that's, I think, what's going on here with the special gifts. We don't get to make a hierarchy of these things about those of us who have received more and those of us who have received less, because all of us are simply just putting our hands out and receiving. And we do this all the time. We do this in our churches. We do this in our world. We're always ranking people. We're always so impressed with those above us. We're always making sure, well, at least I'm not like them, right? And that simply just does not work. That is being conformed to the world around us. We are invited to humility, and this body metaphor, which Paul uses here slightly differently than he does in the kind of more famous Corinthians passage, one of pointing out that we ultimately, we don't get to have this way of looking over each other because we belong to each other, right? Just as my hand and my eye are very different, but both very important parts of my body functioning, like they're both good at some things. They're both very needed to the overall health of me, and they don't really get to rank. They're just so different. Is that really the metaphor we have of the Christian church? And then he takes it in a very interesting direction, one that I think we tend to overlook nowadays, and that he talks about these spiritual gifts. He talks about these four roles. What are they? Like prophet. The prophet's the first one. We've got a teacher. We've got a service person, which is the same word as later is going to be used with a deacon, one who's serving. And we get one who is giving generously. Now, it's an interesting set because these were likely like actual titles back in the early church, right? There were people who were prophets who had a very specific role of speaking God's word very directly long before the Bible was readily available, right? We have teachers who are pretty similar to kind of our modern day pastors. We have deacons, or those who serve primarily. Their job is to kind of to serve and to teach and to make sure the least are cared for. Again, this is in a world in which that job, people are often starving if they're not doing their job well. This last one is when we met. It's not just a donor. In the Roman world, it would have been a patron, right? And I love what he says there. He says, we give without any strings attached. That would have been very nonconformist to the culture around them, right? Patronage was a huge part of the culture. There are those who give and pay for teachers. There are those who pay for artists. And you most certainly get something in return. It's like you're collecting people. It's like you're pointing out, here are the people that I'm a patron of. Look how amazing I am. They need to give you honor. They need to give you acknowledgement. And Paul is on each one of these things, because you can see how any one of those roles is one in which we could very easily start doing some ranking, right? Like we do it left and right in our modern churches with pastors, right? This is the guy who's up front. This is the one who has the deep knowledge. This is the one who supposedly knows more about God than the rest of us. Oh, they're so impressive, right? Or maybe it's a very different kind of a world. Like I've worked in nonprofits and social work. There's hardcore people who are out there serving and making a difference and changing the world. Or maybe it's the big fish in fundraising, right? The people who come and, like the old patronage system, give more money. They have made a significant contribution to make our work possible and continued. Many of the churches I've been in, there is a little bit more of a weakness and misunderstanding about what a prophetic role, a direct relationship with God and a direct ability to speak. I do believe that the Spirit is still around and still does those sorts of things, versus other churches when the prophet is the only person with authority, right? But what we're missing from all of those models these are all just one example. Not all churches did it this way, and Paul knew that. He gives other lists of what are some of the expressions of the Spirit. He says, you know what? These four very important roles, all of which could be overemphasized and considered, the higher, the better ranked or whatever. That's how the world thinks. That's not how you are to think. You are one body. You are one group of people trying to live sacrificial lives, not giving up all things so that God will get off your back or you can get what you want from Him. You are responding to goodness and grace, right? You're not doing it like the world does, which loves ranking things, which loves leadership, which loves saying who's important and who's not. We are simply a body. And the prophet needs the teacher as much as the server, as much as the person who is able to give and be generous, right? These are simply different parts of the same body. And whole, there's no ranking there. It's still pretty radical. We're still not really that willing to go there. And we keep conforming in the way we do community, in the way we value the people around us. And the invitation, again, is to come and die in some ways, right? But at the same time, I think Paul's using that more positively. Come and belong to God. Be His children. Show what it lives to live a life that doesn't look like everyone else around you, in which you think like God does, in which you value things like God does, in which we experience the kingdom and a life in the way the people around us who have a different system, who do not receive the goodness of God the way we have yet, who are not being invited because we're allowing ourselves to be conformed rather than transformed into who God would have us be and speaking into a world that so desperately needs His presence.